Welcome back. Today's explainer dives into a really fascinating constitutional mystery about Nigeria's public spending. We're going to unpack a brilliant analysis by Lawson Akigbe that asks a fundamental question. How exactly do power, money, and law actually interact in a modern democracy? So we're going to look strictly at the mechanics of this system, using his insights to understand a massive structural shift that's happening literally right before our eyes.
Okay, to really get this mystery, we've got to start with a scenario that's going to feel incredibly familiar if you follow the news at all. Picture this, right? A state governor steps up to a podium. Maybe there's been a natural disaster, and the governor enthusiastically announces 5 billion naira for flood victims. The crowd goes wild, the newspapers report it the very next day, and everyone applauds the decisive action. But the spending doesn't stop there. A few days later, another official, maybe from a different state or a federal agency, swiftly and very publicly approves 20 billion naira for an urgent security intervention. And again, the TV analysts nod approvingly. I mean, it sounds like a necessary, bold move, right? And then, just to cap off the whole sequence, the president releases 10 billion for a sudden national emergency. Social media goes crazy praising the rapid response. But here's what's truly fascinating about this entire sequence of announcements. It's how the money actually behaves. As Lawson Akigbe puts it in the analysis, government money in these instances acts kind of like a Nollywood ghost. It just magically appears out of thin air. One minute there is zero provision for it in the public discourse, and the very next minute, billions have been solidly approved.
So, that brings us to the rather awkward central question of our explainer today. While everyone is cheering the intervention and moving on to the next news cycle, nobody really stops to ask, which pocket did this money actually come from? I mean, if these billions weren't planned for, where were they hiding? We're challenged here to really think about the actual source of these seemingly magical billions. Because while in a republic, money doesn't just materialize like a ghost.
Section 1. The Constitutional Rules. Let's strip away the illusion of that Nollywood ghost for a second and look at what the Nigerian Constitution actually dictates regarding public funds.
The absolutely crucial point comes down to this. According to Sections 80 and 81 of the Constitution, public money belongs to the people, period. And because it belongs to the people, it literally cannot be spent without legislative approval. The fundamental rule is absolute: no appropriation, no expenditure. It doesn't say announce first and explain later, and it definitely doesn't say trust me, I'm the governor. It strictly requires a legal appropriation process before a single naira leaves the treasury. The law actually sets a really strict boundary here. The president and the governors, they have immense responsibilities for sure, and they absolutely have the power to propose spending. However, the Constitution strictly prohibits them from acting as human ATMs. Right? An executive can't just press a button, announce a cash withdrawal, and expect the system to just dispense the funds without prior legislative authorization. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what about real emergencies? Floods and security crises don't exactly wait for parliamentary debates. And actually, the drafters of the Constitution knew that. They totally anticipated emergencies. Sections 83 and 123 legally permit access to contingency funds for urgent, unforeseen expenses. But, and this is a massive but, there is a strict two-step process. Step 1, you access the contingency funds. Step 2, the executive must return to the legislature with a supplementary appropriation bill. You have to square the ledger legally.
So the constitutional intention was for this contingency fund to act sort of like an emergency credit card. A limited safety net meant for true, immediate crises, which you then have to pay off and justify to the parliament. But the current practice highlighted in the source material, it's that executives are treating public funds like an infinite, limitless black card. They announce the spending as if that constitutional limit just doesn't exist.
Section 2. The missing parliament. Because if the executive is bypassing the rules, what exactly is the legislature doing while all these massive spending announcements are being broadcasted?
Every single time another multi-billionaire approval hits the news, a trail of critical constitutional questions is just completely ignored. Was the money budgeted? Was it actually drawn from a legal contingency fund? Was a supplementary budget passed to cover it? Did the Executive Council even deliberate and approve it? The silence on these questions is practically deafening. The author notes that many of these spending announcements just emerge without any visible legislative process whatsoever.
Akigbe uses a really brilliant analogy here to describe this dynamic. Instead of functioning like a constitutional republic with checks and balances, the system has basically devolved into something resembling a patriarchal family meeting. The head of the house just sits down and dictates, I have approved 50 billion naira. There's no debate, no checking of the accounts, just a unilateral declaration of spending.
To understand just how far this strays from the legal baseline, we only have to look at the Supreme Court's own words. In the famous resource control case, that's the Attorney General of Abia State versus the Attorney General of the Federation, the court set a super clear precedent. The message is completely unequivocal. Public money does not belong to politicians. It belongs to Nigerians. The law 100% backs the public ownership of these funds.
And we see this exact same principle in the recent Serap case, which challenged the National Assembly regarding the purchase of luxury SUVs. The court used this opportunity to remind public officials that legislative autonomy is not a license for self-service. The big takeaway here is profound. Separation of powers, which is a core pillar of the Republic, does not mean a separation from common sense, and it definitely doesn't mean a separation from accountability.
Which brings us to a dramatic and honestly somewhat tragic contrast. Historically, parliaments were fierce protectors of the treasury. I mean, they fought kings, they started civil wars, they literally chopped off royal heads over the power of the purse. But contrast that historical fire with Nigeria's current legislature. Today, the parliament seemingly learns about massive executive spending announcements the exact same way ordinary citizens do, by watching the television news. The very institution designed to guard the purse seems perfectly content to just sit back and spectate.
Section 3. An ornamental wallet. Let's get into Lawson Akabe's final warning about what this all means for the future of governance.
The reality of constitutional erosion is that it rarely arrives in a military uniform. It doesn't announce itself with a coup or some dramatic suspension of the laws. Instead, it happens quietly. It arrives disguised as administrative convenience. It happens one special approval at a time, one emergency intervention at a time, and one unexplained billion at a time. The power of the purse is migrating silently from the parliament to the executive, without a single word of the Constitution ever being rewritten.
And that silent migration leads us to a highly provocative thought. When billions are consistently announced without any visible appropriation, without supplementary budgets, and without legislative scrutiny, it begs a really critical question. Are we still operating a constitutional republic, or have we simply elected kings for 4-year terms? If an executive can just spend at will, the structural limits of a republic really start to fade away.
Which leaves us with this incredibly powerful final metaphor. If every massive expenditure is simply justified after the fact, after the money has already left the account and been spent, then the legislature's famous power of the purse is no longer a real constitutional weapon. It's been completely hollowed out. It's become nothing more than an ornamental wallet, carried around for ceremonial occasions maybe, but completely empty of any real power. It's a massive structural shift that everyone who cares about governance should keep a very close eye on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep questioning the structures behind the headlines. See you next time.